Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a highly provocative, honestly fascinating futurist manifesto. We're looking at a text that basically challenges the entire foundation of modern relationships in society. It asks us to completely rethink how we live, how we love, and just how we organize ourselves. It's a really radical vision. And look, whether you absolutely agree with it or entirely disagree, it offers a deeply interesting lens on our world right now. So we're going to objectively break down this manifesto, explore its critique of today's society, and examine its utopian proposal for tomorrow. Let's jump right in. Right off the bat, the source text hooks you with this incredibly jarring claim. Quote, "We abolished the private ownership of property, now we must abolish the private ownership of human beings." Wow, right? The authors are making a massive metaphorical leap here. They're arguing that the traditional institution of marriage, as we know it today, literally treats humans as private property. They're welcoming us to what they call the post-marriage era. It's an intense way to start, and it perfectly sets the stage for the deep critique they dive into next. So part one of their argument is what they call the illusion of forever, why marriage is the ultimate prison. To wrap our heads around their radical solution, we kind of have to look at their intense critique of our present reality first. They call our current world Civilization 2.0, and the manifesto points to all these very relatable, everyday modern anxieties. We're talking skyrocketing divorce rates, endless online gender wars, the quiet desperation of couples bound together by mortgages, being trapped in child-rearing anxiety, and that crushing pressure to be someone's absolute everything. You know, society constantly tells us that marriage itself isn't the problem, right? Like you just need better communication or maybe a bit more therapy. Well, this manifesto calls that a flat-out lie. It argues that the current system isn't broken at all. Actually, it's working exactly as designed, as a cage of obligation meant to trap free souls. Which leads us to part two, love as private property, the economics of romance. According to the text, the core issue here is how we basically merge capitalist economic concepts with human connection. They call this the ownership model of love. The argument is that in Civilization 2.0, love is treated like a scarce resource that you have to hoard. Relationships rely on these rigid exclusivity contracts, making marriage act as a literal, legal, and economic cage. The language they use is incredibly evocative. They say lovers effectively become wardens, and pure joy is transformed into a heavy duty. They argue that the second someone says, "you are mine," they're applying the cold logic of capitalism directly to human spirituality. You're taking a sovereign soul and locking it inside an obligation. But what if love was never meant to be owned? This is the crucial question, and it marks a huge turning point in the source material. It pivots us away from this really heavy, grim critique of our current society straight into a sweeping, highly utopian vision for the future. I mean, if love isn't meant to be owned, how exactly are we supposed to live? This brings us to part three, entering Civilization 3.0, the Human AI Co-Living Lab. The manifesto asserts that in higher dimensions of existence, no one marries. Nobody belongs to anybody. By contrasting these two states of being, the text emphasizes a massive paradigm shift. Civilization 2.0 isn't just flawed, they describe it as a sinking ship. A system built entirely on exclusivity, control, and legal contracts that is desperately trying to save itself. Civilization 3.0, on the other hand, isn't presented as a patch or a quick fix for a broken system. It's an entirely different paradigm of human existence. The authors describe it as a completely new ocean, defined by pure connection, spontaneous love, and absolute joy, completely free from the heavy weight of obligation. All right, let's look at part four, the second home model, redesigning society. To actually make this high-level abstract vision a functional reality, the authors propose a really specific logistical framework. They call this the second home model. Essentially, it's a communal living structure that fundamentally abolishes marriage, dismantles the nuclear family entirely, and removes emotional ownership to create ultimate personal liberation. Now, the obvious question you probably have, and the text actually anticipates this, is wouldn't this just create utter chaos? Well, the manifesto argues a firm no. It claims that dismantling these traditional structures actually paves the way for genuine freedom, getting rid of the foundational fears that drive so much of human behavior today. So how does it actually work? The authors pair every abolished system with a very specific communal solution. Instead of being financially dependent on a partner, your housing and food are collectively provided by the community. Instead of toxic couples staying together just for the kids, children are raised by the whole village. That deep fear of aging alone replaced by a system where the elderly are cared for collectively, with dignity and love. And the crushing weight of mortgages and legal contracts is replaced by a life entirely without debt or structural dependency. The whole idea is that when you remove the burden of individual survival, the toxic controlling elements of relationships just disappear because survival is guaranteed by the community. Which brings us to part 5, love without ownership, relationships in their natural state. This raises a genuinely fascinating conceptual question. Think about it. If you remove all the traditional structures, if there's no mortgage, no contract, zero financial dependency, and absolutely no fear, what exactly remains between two people? Well, the authors suggest that relationships simply return to their natural spiritual state. Interactions become light, playful, and incredibly fluid. People form deeply spiritual bonds based entirely on resonance rather than requirement. And perhaps the most radical claim here is that in this state, there is a total absence of jealousy. Why? Because there's literally no concept of ownership. Without ownership, people come together naturally, and crucially, they're able to part ways with grace, without any of the bitterness or destructive fallout we see today. The manifesto wraps up its initial argument with this really powerful call to action. You don't need a marriage certificate, you need a consciousness upgrade. The authors are urging their readers to basically unplug from fear, step right out of the cage of exclusivity, and return to spontaneous love. It's framing societal change not just as tweaking a few laws or economic policies, but as a fundamental evolution of the human mind itself. Now, the source material does tease that future dispatches will reveal the actual nuts and bolts of this world, like how the second home functions without money, and how AI supposedly manages the day-to-day so humans are finally free to just live. But for now, looking at this blueprint for Civilization 3.0, we are left to ponder something pretty huge. Is the traditional structure of ownership really holding us back? Does true human freedom and true love actually require a complete consciousness upgrade? It's a completely wild, fascinating perspective to consider, and it challenges absolutely everything we're taught about relationships. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today, and keep questioning.